Hello friends, John Lebon here on Friday, May 13, 2016. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how the Cavendish experiment is scientism's Achilles heel, a glaring and comical absurdity which underpins the official explanation for gravity and therefore the entire spinning ball Earth cosmology with which we are indoctrinated from a young age. This video will also serve another purpose. It will demonstrate one example of the good which has come out of the Flat Earth Renaissance, which has swept the alternative media landscape over the past 18 months. There are some people out there, possibly even watching this video right now, who are convinced that this Flat Earth Renaissance is a state-sponsored psyop designed to discredit the truth movement and that no good can come from genuine inquiry into the shape of the Earth. There are others who are convinced that the Earth is actually flat, and that their favourite YouTube flat earthers are going to help lead the world to salvation, one flat Earth themed item of bargain price paraphernalia at a time. It is the case that both groups are, to varying degrees, deluded. While there are certainly some suspicious elements profiting from the current interest in flat Earth, it is laughable to claim, as many do, that it is somehow harmful for people to question the notion that we live on a giant spinning ball. At the same time, while it is true that the prevailing cosmology is built upon highly dubious assumptions, those who have fallen into the Flat Earth online cult and defend it with vigour are living proof that fools and their money and time are soon parted. Despite all of this, much good has come from the Flat Earth Renaissance, particularly for those of us who weren't naive enough to get caught up on one side or the other of this obviously false dichotomy. A small group of individuals, working independently, have helped to uncover, expose and ridicule many aspects of the scientism belief system which pervades our society. If there ever were a genuine truth community working towards a better world, this is how it might operate. The information which has come to light about the Cavendish experiment is one perfect example of what has been accomplished. Whether or not they are or were misguided in their views about the ultimate shape of the Earth, a handful of independent researchers who took an interest in flat Earth theory have exposed what I am now terming the Achilles heel of scientism. And so the next portion of this presentation will review, in chronological order, the most prominent content concerning the Cavendish experiment, which has come about as a result of the Flat Earth Renaissance. Links to all materials cited will be available in the info box below. Then I will present one new piece of research regarding the Cavendish experiment, which will serve as yet another nail in scientism's coffin. Finally, the presentation will conclude with a reflection on the significance of this information, as well as the current state of the Flat Earth so-called movement. By the end of this video, you will know what the Cavendish experiment is, why it's so important to the spinning ball Earth theory, and how you can use this information to gauge just how much faith those around you have in the prevailing scientism doctrine. So let's get started. On the Ball Earth Skeptic Roundtable episode 11, broadcast August 19, 2015, we invited two prominent scientism spruikers to join the panel and provide their proof that we all live on a giant spinning ball. Suffice to say, they came armed with a lot of mathematical equations which, to be fair, do actually check out and prove we live on a giant spinning ball if and only if you accept the unstated assumptions which underpin their mathematics. As you will see for yourself in the following clip, they didn't react too kindly when somebody did dare to question those assumptions.
Again, you're the one saying that water curves around the ball, and you're saying that that's due to gravity. That's fine by me, because I'd like to talk about gravity. Now, you've been very cleverly and masterfully avoiding the topic of the gravitational constant.
For God's sake, no, I haven't. I'm sorry, but that is a completely disingenuous tone. I have not been avoiding gravity.
Well, then, can you please explain to me how we arrived at the gravitational constant?
I know that there's the Cavendish experiment. I know that experiments have been done recently and since to try and verify what the gravitational constant is with increasing accuracy. My point is that when it comes to the shape of the Earth, it's a question of geometry, not of physics. So I don't really need to touch on gravity in order to deal with the geometry of the Earth. Well, I don't mind touching on gravity, but it just has nothing to do with the shape of the Earth in terms of the geometry of the Earth. And I
Okay, well,
think
you
you're
brought up the
trying to
Cavendish.
steer it to this because you don't want to deal with geometry, because you know that geometry just craps all over the idea that the Earth isn't a ball, because it proves it's a ball.
Well, I've been very patient with you. Now I've got a couple of questions for you. You brought up the Cavendish experiments. Now, these were the experiments back in the late
No, I want to go to the geometry, please,
1800s.
and I want to deal with the gish gallops that are coming.
I'll be more than
I'm
happy to
sorry,
do that,
but
but I think fair is fair here. We've listened to you. Now, I've just got one line of inquiry for you. You brought up the Cavendish experiments. I'm glad that you did. For listeners who aren't aware, the gravitational constant that is still used by so-called scientists to this day was determined in the late 1700s by hanging two heavy balls from a torsion balance. Is that your understanding, sir? The gravitational constant on which all of your theories are based
no.
was determined in the late 1700s. Is that your understanding, sir?
No. No, just
Well,
because Cavendish started the experiments going doesn't mean that we're using the measurements from that. You do realise that scientists repeat experiments, improve experiments, and continue improving those experiments and those measurements. The gravitational constant we use today is not the one that Cavendish figured out.
And how different are they? How much has it changed in those 200 years?
Oh, God, it hasn't had to change too much as far as I can remember.
No, isn't that amazing? The gravitational constant on which all of this is based has changed less than 1% in more than 200 years. Were you aware of that?
Yeah. Yep, 1% down to 6.67, which, oh wow, so great, our measurements have become more precise.
Yeah, so you don't find that at all remarkable that the gravitational constant on which everything else is based, especially to do with gravity, was determined to within 1% of our current figure more than 200 years ago by hanging balls from a torsion balance. You don't find that noteworthy?
No, considering we use different methods of doing it today that come back with the same, more or less the same result.
And so, live on the air, with close to 200 people watching in real time, and thousands more to listen back after the fact, a leading Scientism spruiker on YouTube was forced to admit not only that his gravitational constant was first determined more than 200 years ago, with heavy balls hanging in a shed, but that the value for big G used today is within 1% of the value discovered by that rudimentary experiment. To say that it was an embarrassing display would be putting it mildly. That was August 19 of 2015. I followed that up a few weeks later with a Rosita's parody based on the Cavendish experiment, entitled Rosita's Leaves the Cult Behind. That clip was uploaded on September 9. It was picked up by one of the leading flat earth proponents at the time, Tiger Dan, who used it as a template for his own video on the same topic, entitled Man Who Escaped Science Cult. Tiger Dan's subscriber base was already well into 5 figures at the time, and his video went semi-viral, and has approximately 100,000 views as of May 2016. This meant that audiences who had not even been exposed to the burgeoning flat earth renaissance were viewing content which challenged the foundations of their cosmological understanding. Here is a short excerpt of Tiger Dan's video.
So before I show you the clip, if you type in Cavendish experiment, the first video that shows up is this one. It's come from the University of Nottingham, so the man there will be a physicist, a lecturer, and he's explaining how the Cavendish experiment works. You'll see a beautiful looking German student like this one here. It's in German if we click on it, explaining how to weigh the mass of the Earth by using the Cavendish principle. It's even taught in the Chinese education system, and you'll find hundreds of videos and demonstrations from universities including Harvard and all the top ones from around the world recreating this experiment. So, in a nutshell, you suspend 2 lead balls from the ceiling, and depending on which direction they spin, you can measure the gravity, and from that, you can find out the mass of the Earth. You can also weigh the mass of the moon, the sun, and all the stars from this device. It has 99% accuracy, and they've only improved on it a tiny bit in the last 200 years. Today, there's less than a 1% inaccuracy in this method of weighing the mass of a planet. It's phenomenal.
Tiger Dan's video was uploaded on September 10. A few days later, I released a feature-length presentation entitled Response to Cahem plus Cavendish Question, in which I explained in greater detail my criticisms of the Cavendish experiment and the gravitational constant, among other things. The video was a direct response to the attacks and opprobrium I had been receiving from a small clique of regulars on the fakeologist.com website. Prior to the advent of the Bald Earth Skeptic Roundtable, my relationship with Fakeologist and its regulars had been positive and cordial, which is why I took the time to respond in the manner I did. Fortunately, other content producers began to release their own videos on the topic shortly thereafter. On September 23, Brian Mullen released part 2 of his Balls Out Physics series, entitled The Gravitational Constant, in which he discussed the Cavendish experiment and its importance to the theory of gravity. It was a superb presentation and currently has over 20,000 views. Here is an excerpt.
He theorized that there was this gravitational constant, but he didn't actually figure it out before he died. And it wasn't until a little over 100 years later, about 120, 130 years later, that a man named Henry Cavendish came along. Henry Cavendish was very wealthy, and he did a lot of things apparently. I've listened to some very respected physics teachers praise his work, and I studied some of his work, but mostly what I was interested in was how he determined this gravitational constant. Okay. Cavendish apparently had a lot of property, a lot of money, and he set up an experiment where, get rid of all this. Now let's go back to where we just have these two equations. You know, they haven't figured out the big G yet. They do know the radius of Earth, though, because they knew the circumference. So they knew the radius of Earth, but they didn't know big G, and they didn't know the mass of Earth. Okay? So going back to Cavendish in 1798, Cavendish built this box, this wooden box on his property. Looks something like this. Okay? And in this box, there was a pulley with a rope leading outside the box, something like that, a little handle on it. And what hung from it was this thing called a torsion rod. Looks something like this. And on the ends of the rod were these large lead balls. And on the inside were these smaller lead balls. Something like this. Pulley right here. And he used lead because it's very massive, it's very dense. And he, apparently, according to the history, he knew that he had to get away from the box because his gravity, you know, his mass, would affect the experiment. You know, assuming that this is correct, that the force of gravity is, you know, there's a force of gravity between any two masses, not just the Earth and us. All masses have a force of gravity on each other, or create a force of gravity on all other masses based on this equation and the proportion that Newton came up with. So he somehow set up some telescopes that went back to his house. You know, keep his house off the board, just assume his house is down here somewhere. So he could observe this experiment, and somehow he calculated big G from this. Okay. Well, when I started researching this, I said, okay, well, let's see some examples of a modern day torsion rod experiment that somebody's built that shows how this works. Well, I couldn't really find one. I actually had a lot of trouble finding one. Actually, one of the physics professors that was praising him had a little model that he held up and was joking that his TA couldn't get it to work and got frustrated with it and gave up. And I'm thinking to myself, over 200 years later, we don't have models of this, or repeats of this experiment all over the place that determine big G. It didn't make much sense to me. So I said, okay, well, you know, going back through the history, let's assume that he did this somehow. He's a really smart guy, and we just haven't been able to get it to work again. Okay? what I'm saying here is, if you follow where I'm going with this, how do we know they didn't guess, or that Cavendish didn't guess this mass of Earth, and then just use it to solve for G, and then do the opposite and say that he did this, that he solved for the mass of Earth using that value of G. It's the same thing, just based on the algebra. And then if you plug both of those values into this equation up here and use the mass of any object, whether it's a man, a horse, a carriage, anything, and use the radius of Earth, you're going to get a force that's equal to the weight you get for that same object if you just multiply the mass of that object times the acceleration due to gravity, or the rate at which the acceleration at which things fall towards Earth. Seem far-fetched? I don't know. The fact that we can't really get this experiment to work, this torsion rod experiment to work, is perplexing. Very perplexing.
Less than 2 weeks later, on October 2, Brian appeared on Patricia Steere's Hot Potatoes show. Unfortunately, they did not discuss the Cavendish experiment, but Brian's appearance helped attract even more attention to his breakthrough series. That interview with Patricia currently has over 30,000 views all of its own. A couple of months later, on November 11 of 2015, prominent flat earther Globe Skeptic released his own video focusing on the Cavendish experiment, entitled Why the Cavendish Experiment is Ridiculous. It was actually a re-upload of a video originally produced by a YouTuber named Fake Spaceman in Space. As of May 2016, the video has well over 10,000 views. Here is a brief excerpt.
Was trying to find this experiment being replicated and demonstrated. So I think I found the video, so let's have a watch.
Towards the end of his life, he did a crucial experiment, which is represented by these lead balls. At the back of it, he had a big garden shed, which might seem like the size of my house. And in it, he had 2 lead balls, like this, suspended from the ceiling. Only this is not to scale. This is, lead balls. Now, the real problem is that he wanted to measure the attraction between 2 objects due to gravity. In other words, there's a gravitational attraction between you and me, or between me and this lead ball.
So gravity, which is a theory, and was only invented because they said that the Earth spins, and it's needed to explain why things don't go flying off the spinning Earth. And as far as I know, this is the only so-called experiment, like this chap's explaining, that gravity, according to them, is all objects of mass are pulling towards each other. And so this experiment is supposed to demonstrate that. So let's see.
So he had to be a long way away to look at the experiment, otherwise he'd interfere with it. So he had an aperture, a place where he could look through, and he put a telescope out there, and he stood outside in all weathers, and he was in his 60s doing this, staring through the window to take his measurements over a year. There's another set of lead balls inside there. This experiment really is very difficult to get to work, and a technician has sawed it apart because he got so frustrated.
Yeah, I don't think I need to say much else, do I? The technician got frustrated, so he sawed it apart because it doesn't work. Brilliant. So if you're having a debate with anybody about gravity, okay, and they try and throw this in your face, just send them to this video. Cavendish experiment, 60 symbols. This is such a good experiment that they can't even replicate it without taking a hacksaw to it.
And then right in the middle there's a bit of glass, there's a mirror which should be suspended from a torsion wire. So you'd set it up like this in his shed, and you put it like that, and this lead ball would attract that lead ball, and this lead ball would attract this one. And so it would be pushed a little bit this way and twist the wire, and that would be pushed a little bit that way, and the wire would twist, and as the wire twists, the mirror which is dangling in there, would twist a little bit, and light which comes in would be reflected off at a slightly different angle. And all he had to do was measure the angle. He then had to move it the other way round. Oh, he didn't move this bit. He moved the lead balls round so that you had an equal and opposite effect on the other side. So instead of having, you'd have that configuration. He had this is a very complicated technical thing for the time. This experiment really is very difficult to get to work, and a technician has sawed it apart because he got so frustrated. 18th century we're talking about, and he put that way round, and then it was pushed the other way, and you could then see the displacement. Moreover, you could measure the period of oscillation of this, and from that get all the properties of the wire, the torsional constant. And that enabled him to measure big G, the gravitational constant, to an accuracy of 1%.
Then on December 14, I released one more video on the topic entitled Armoured Skeptic Meets Henry Cavendish. It was a short and humorous piss take of a very prominent YouTuber calling himself the Armoured Skeptic, who at the time was engaged in somewhat of a battle with leading flat eartherianism. Although not an exhaustive summary, this list is a fair summation of the prominent coverage the Cavendish experiment has received so far in this scene on YouTube. Note that each of Tiger Dan, Brian Mullen, and Globe Skeptic managed to attract significantly greater views to their videos on this topic than I did, and they deserve full credit for their achievements in spreading awareness about the absurdity of the Cavendish experiment, as does Fake Spaceman in Space for his original contribution to Globe Skeptic's video. At the end of this presentation, I will come back to these four YouTubers and the fascinating paths they have taken since uploading their content. First, I want to move on to the new research I have to present regarding the Cavendish experiment. Some commenters on my videos claimed that I was misrepresenting the Cavendish experiment. After all, how could it be that everything we are taught about Big G is derived from a rudimentary experiment carried out in somebody's shed more than 200 years ago? How could it be that this experiment, performed before the invention of the light bulb, was used accurately to determine the mass of the entire Earth? Skeptics are quite right to question these absurd notions. Who could believe such utter nonsense? So let's consult my handy Oxford Dictionary of Physics, shall we? This is from the 4th edition, printed in 2000. I picked up my copy for just a few dollars from my local university campus second-hand bookshop, which was closing down to make way for a new fast food outlet. Such is the state of academia in my country today. But I digress. On your screen are scans I took of the book myself. C is for Henry Cavendish, British chemist and physicist born in France. Although untrained, his inheritance from his grandfather, the Duke of Devonshire, enabled him to live as a recluse and study science. In his experiments with gases, he correctly distinguished between hydrogen and carbon dioxide, and in 1781 synthesized water by exploding hydrogen in oxygen. He also constructed a torsion balance in 1798, with which he measured the mean density, and hence mass, of the Earth. T is for torsion balance, an instrument for measuring very weak forces. It consists of a horizontal rod fixed to the end of a vertical wire or fibre, or to the centre of a taut horizontal wire. The forces to be measured are applied to the end or ends of the rod. The turning of the rod may be measured by the displacement of a beam of light reflected from a plane mirror attached to it. The best known form is that used by Henry Cavendish and later Charles Boys to determine the gravitational constant. In this form, the balance is calibrated by determining the torsional coefficient of the suspension by treating the device as a torsional pendulum. G is for gravitational constant, symbol G. The constant that appears in Newton's law of gravitation, it has the value 6.67259. G is usually regarded as a universal constant, although in some models of the universe, it is proposed that it decreases with the time as the universe expands. N is for Newton's law of gravitation. There is a force of attraction between any two massive particles in the universe. For any 2 point masses m1 and m2, separated by a distance d, the force of attraction F is given by F equals m1 m2 g divided by d squared, where g is the gravitational constant. Real bodies having spherical symmetry act as point masses positioned at their centers of mass. And finally, G is for gravity, the phenomenon associated with the gravitational force acting on any object that has mass and is situated within the Earth's gravitational field. The weight of a body is equal to the force of gravity acting on the body. According to Newton's second law of motion, F equals ma, where F is the force producing an acceleration a on a body of mass m. The weight of a body is therefore equal to the product of its mass and the acceleration due to gravity, which is now called the acceleration of freefall. By combining the second law of motion with Newton's law of gravitation, it follows that G equals gm over d squared, where g is the gravitational constant, m is the mass of the Earth, and d is the distance of the body from the center of the Earth. For a body on Earth's surface, g equals 9.80665 meters per second squared. Putting it all together, according to the Oxford Dictionary of Physics, the modern theory of gravity is based on Newton's law of gravitation. Newton's law of gravitation depends on the gravitational constant. The gravitational constant was determined using a torsion balance by Henry Cavendish, whose experiment determined the mass of the Earth and hence determines the gravitational constant, or big G. In other words, when I say that the entire theory of gravity is dependent upon the Cavendish experiment, and the Cavendish experiment comprised of a rudimentary torsion balance which was allegedly able to measure the mass of the entire Earth, I'm not misrepresenting science. I'm telling you the official story of science. If that sounds utterly ridiculous to you, that is because it is utterly ridiculous, and that is why the Cavendish experiment is scientism's Achilles heel. Nobody but the most devout of scientism believers could possibly want to defend such nonsense. If the Pope or the Dalai Lama told the world they could measure the mass of the entire Earth with a torsion balance in their shed, they would be rightly laughed at by all people of sound mind. However, when the same nonsensical balderdash is written in science textbooks, many otherwise intelligent people accept it as not only plausible, but as true and legitimate. This is because they have faith in what they call science, and what objective people rightly term scientism. This is why an understanding of the Cavendish experiment can save you tremendous amounts of time when dealing with believers in scientism. An easy way to determine whether or not a person you are speaking with is capable of thinking for themselves is to ask them, do you think anybody could weigh the entire Earth with heavy balls hanging in a shed? If they reply yes, then they are demonstrating that they are no more able to think critically about their dogma than the person who believes that a man can part the seas with a stick or turn water into wine. In many ways, the belief that a man could weigh the entire Earth with heavy balls hanging in a shed is even more fantastical and ridiculous than the common myths of the Abrahamic religions. If you decide to argue with somebody who has so much faith in science that they would defend the Cavendish experiment, then you are no wiser than the person who would argue with somebody who believes that Moses parted the seas or that Jesus turned water into wine. When somebody has that much blind faith in their dogma, then no amount of reasoning or evidence will sway their minds. Period. And so the Cavendish experiment is not only scientism's Achilles heel, but also a simple yet effective litmus test to determine if the person you are engaging with is operating with blind faith in their authority. Which brings me to the final segment of this presentation. Earlier it was noted that 4 other individuals involved in the Flat Earth Renaissance had taken the time to look into and expose the Cavendish experiment. The striking thing about the 4 individuals is the paths they have taken with their channels in the time since. In the case of Brian Mullen, he still operates his YouTube channel and continues to release interesting content focused on challenging the prevailing scientism orthodoxy. However, he has publicly stated that he avoids the term flat earth because he is smart enough to understand the negative connotations such labeling can entail. He simply questions and reviews what others claim to be true, which is what science is supposed to be all about. In the case of Tiger Dan, things are rather different. Having spent considerable time and energy attempting to reconcile the popular flat earth maps with known international flights, In early 2016, he began releasing a series of videos explaining why he no longer believed that these flat Earth so-called maps were true representations of the Earth. Dan also began criticizing and even attacking those flat earthers he saw to be intentionally misleading and profiting from their viewers. He was quickly turned on by the flat earth cult, with hundreds flocking to downvote his videos and leave angry comments. The leading flat earth YouTubers denounced Dan for his change of opinion, with several of the most well-known flat earth YouTubers claiming that Dan had been possessed by demons or killed and replaced by the CIA, and so on. This despite all of the work he had done to help spread information about things like the Cavendish experiment. The story with fake spaceman in space, also known as Jamie, is similar to that of Tiger Dan. Jamie had actually released content regarding the Flat Earth theory well before the Flat Earth Renaissance even began. While Eric Dubay in late 2014 and Mark Sargent in early 2015 were largely responsible for the Renaissance taking off as it did, a small number of people like Jamie had been discussing the topic in the years prior to it gaining steam. Jamie took part in the Renaissance and, even as late as November 2015, was appearing in Flat Earth Live Hangouts with newer converts to the belief system. Then he began to question leading YouTube Flat Earthers and suggested that some of their behaviours, including censorship of those asking questions, were cult-like. He was soon ostracised and turned on in much the same fashion as Tiger Dan. Even worse, an unknown individual, believed to be a flat earther, sought vengeance on Jamie by finding his personal details and then contacting his family members, allegedly spreading nasty rumours to them about Jamie's mental condition. Jamie's family members were naturally concerned and contacted him to ensure that he was okay. Since then, Jamie has deleted his channel, then begun new channels, which he has also deleted. At last check, Jamie no longer called himself a flat earther. The story with Globe Skeptic is less clear. As of May 2016, he has not uploaded any new material to his channel for several months. And so, of the 5 individuals who have helped to research, expose and ridicule the Cavendish experiment, one has publicly explained why he shies away from the term flat earther. 2 have renounced their belief in flat earth and been heavily attacked by the cult for it. 1 has apparently stopped uploading content for reasons unknown, and 1 is responsible for producing the video you are watching right now and never called himself a flat earther at any stage of his investigations into the prevailing spinning ball earth doctrine. It is worth noting that I, too, have come under attack from the flat earth cult. Several of their members have accused me of being, among other things, a government-paid operative sent to discredit the flat earth so-called movement. My videos which challenge flat earth dogma are constantly thumbs down en masse, despite nobody, spinning ball earther or flat earther, yet releasing a video refuting anything I have said about the shape of the earth. And this is precisely why the flat earth cult needs to be called out, as do those who seek to lead and profit from it. As we have seen with the Cavendish experiment, much good can come from genuine inquiry into the prevailing spinning ball earth paradigm. Those who take the time to independently research and produce content can and will help to undermine scientism and the nonsense it entails. These individuals, a small fraction of the total number of people involved in this scene, can and will be held back and attacked by the flat earth cult, which has been building since 2015. With rare exception, the most prominent flat earth cult leaders have produced little, if any, original research and material, and the few who do often intertwine it with obvious bullshit like shrinking suns, blue screens on the ISS, telepathic monkeys, rain men, water memory, and assorted Kabbalah-inspired New Age religion nonsense. Some even have the nerve to claim that Flat Earth will soon become the dominant belief system, despite all evidence to the contrary, selling false hope to their confused and lonely followers who oftentimes just want to feel like they are part of something. There is, to be sure, nothing wrong with investigating Flat Earth theory. There is not even anything wrong with believing in it, especially in a world where most people genuinely believe they live on a giant spinning ball hurtling through empty space, and that they evolved from fish who evolved from a lightning strike, and that the Earth used to be inhabited by giant lizard birds who disappeared 66 million years ago due to a meteor strike. Compared to that, belief in the azimuthal equidistant map is only mildly insane. And, as we have seen today, much good can come from investigations into it. I personally owe individuals like Eric Dubay, a leading flat earther, a debt of gratitude for his own work in exposing the meat myth, which helped to persuade me to my current diet, which consists of no meat whatsoever. I'll provide a link in the info box below to a podcast of his, which helps change my life for the better. There is, however, something wrong with convincing people of lies, putting yourself forward as an authority, and encouraging your followers to act in nasty ways towards those who disagree with your doctrine. This is why I spend so much time challenging the spinning ball earth paradigm, and why I have also spent a lot of time challenging and debunking the flat earth cult leaders. Many of these people are, in my opinion, probably good people who don't yet realize what they have become. If they spent their energy researching and challenging scientism, who knows what they could achieve? It is my hope that by producing content like the video you have just watched, more people will begin to see the difference between genuine research and the effect it can have, and blind faith in authority and belief systems such as spinning ball earth and flat earth. In conclusion, this video has shown you what the Cavendish experiment is, why it is central to the official spinning ball earth doctrine, and how you can use this knowledge to quickly gauge the faith of others in the modern mass religion of scientism. You have also seen how just a few independent individuals putting their own time into researching the official story can uncover, expose, and ridicule scientism dogma. You have seen the good side of the flat earth renaissance and how some people have used it to help them better understand the lie system we live in, and also the negative side of the flat earth so-called movement and the cult-like behavior it encourages. Now, it will be up to you to decide what to do with this information. The internet is an amazing tool, and although the people who run the show obviously gave it to us for their own, likely evil purposes, the small percentage of us still capable of thinking for ourselves and doing good things for good reasons can accomplish amazing things if we take advantage of this opportunity. So thank you for watching. Please leave your feedback and questions in the comments section below. As always, I may use some of these as the basis for future comment response videos, which you can see on my other channel, John Le Bon Extra, link in the info box below. Be sure to check out all of the videos cited in this presentation, which are also linked to in the info box. Think for yourself, let humility be stronger than ego, and until next time, take care of yourselves.